In Victorian England, a cruel economic reality existed. Unmarried mothers, unable to care for a child and facing total social ruin, would pay a stranger to take their baby off their hands, sometimes for adoption, sometimes, quietly, for something much darker. This practice was called baby farming, and it operated in a legal gray zone that almost nobody policed. Amelia Dyer had been a nurse. She understood how to look trustworthy. She placed newspaper ads offering loving homes for infants in exchange for a fee, and desperate mothers across England sent her their babies and their money. Those babies did not find loving homes. For years, Dyer moved from town to town, changing her name to stay ahead of suspicion, as authorities occasionally investigated the shockingly high mortality rate among children in her care. She was investigated, even briefly imprisoned on lesser charges, but always resumed the practice. In March 1896, a bargeman pulled a parcel from the River Thames. Inside was the body of a baby girl, wrapped in a way that led investigators to a laundry mark, and that mark led them to Amelia Dyer. When police searched her home, they found dozens of pawn tickets for baby clothes and letters from grieving, desperate mothers. Dyer was ultimately convicted in the death of one infant, Doris Marmon, but investigators and historians believe her true victim count stretches into the hundreds. Some estimates suggest as many as 400 infants over a 20-year period, making her possibly the most prolific serial killer in British history. She was executed in June 1896. And yet, ask most people today to name a Victorian serial killer, and you'll hear one name over and over: Jack the Ripper, a killer who murdered 5 women and was never caught. Amelia Dyer, who likely killed hundreds of children and was convicted, has almost entirely vanished from public memory. Why? Historians point to a grim truth. Her victims were infants, poor, illegitimate, and largely invisible to Victorian society, even in life. A society that already treated these children as disposable had little interest in remembering them in death. In the early 1870s, on the lonely Kansas prairie along a well-traveled trail, a family named Bender opened a small inn and general store. It was little more than a single room, divided by a canvas curtain, but on the frontier, any shelter from the elements was welcome. The family consisted of an older couple, a son, and a daughter named Kate Bender, who charmed travelers with seances and spiritualist readings, a popular novelty at the time. Travelers would stop for a meal. They'd be seated at the table, backs to that canvas curtain, and some of them never left. Investigators later determined the method. A family member behind the curtain would strike a seated guest in the head with a hammer. Then the victim would be robbed, killed, and buried in the orchard or cellar behind the property. Locals grew suspicious as travelers heading down that road kept disappearing. When a search party finally investigated the abandoned property in 1873, the Benders had fled just ahead of them. They discovered a cellar floor stained with blood, and eventually the orchard yielded the bodies of at least 11 victims, though the true number may be higher. Despite one of the largest manhunts of the era, complete with reward postings and reported sightings for decades afterward, the Bender family was never definitively captured or identified. They simply vanished into American folklore. Today, they're occasionally mentioned as a historical curiosity, a Wild West ghost story. But strip away the folklore, and what remains is one of the first documented serial killer families in American history, operating with cold, practiced efficiency, a story that's been flattened into campfire legend rather than remembered as the crime it was. In the early 19th century, across the trade roads of colonial India, groups known as Thuggee operated as organized gangs who would befriend travelers, journey alongside them for days to build trust, and then ritually strangle and rob them, disposing of the bodies along the way. Among the men British colonial authorities eventually captured was a man known as Byram, who confessed to participating in the strangulation of a staggering number of victims. Historical accounts and colonial trial records cite a figure of around 931 killings over his lifetime, a number that, if accurate, would place him among the most prolific killers ever documented. Byram was captured in the 1830s as British colonial authorities launched a sweeping campaign to suppress the Thuggee networks, ultimately executing or imprisoning hundreds of alleged members. Here's why his name isn't a household one, even in true crime circles obsessed with body counts. The historical record around Thuggee is deeply tangled with colonial politics. British administrators had strong incentives to exaggerate the scale and organization of Thuggee activity to justify sweeping colonial control and harsh crackdowns, meaning some historians today caution that figures like Byram's confessed count may be inflated, coerced, or shaped by a colonial legal system with its own agenda. That complicated legacy, a genuinely brutal killer, filtered through an unreliable and self-interested colonial record, has left Byram in a strange historical limbo, too disputed for confident retelling, too disturbing to ignore, and ultimately, mostly forgotten outside academic circles.